Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 5 of Clash in a Flash podcast. I'm your host Emerson,
And I'm your co-host Tuan here.
and today we'll be speaking about smurfing in Clash. So I guess just to start off, how would you define smurfing, Tuan?
Uh, I think to put it in simple terms, Smurfing is someone who is very good at a game in this situation, and then they disguise themselves to appear like worse than they actually are, and compete in lower tournaments or like lower level tournaments, basically. And yeah, um, I think that's probably the best way how I can describe it.
Yeah, I would basically agree with that um, definition. I'm just when it comes to Clash, it's really interesting because I always wonder for smurfing, like what is the advantage for the person? But let's say because of Clash and they separate you in tiers, is it a benefit if you're still in the same tier? Like for example, for our team, um, I believe I'm gold 1 in flex and gold 2 in solo duo, and I'm currently tier 1 in Clash, or like I'm ranked that way. But if I played on my friend's account, for example, and he's silver 4 and he's tier 4 now, that's like clear smurfing. There would, in quote, be an advantage because I think our team would be lowered by a bracket. But if I use another example of, let's say I'm silver 4 and I'm tier 4 in Clash, and I play on my friend's account who's maybe bronze 2, right? But he's also still tier 4. Is that smurfing as bad, or is that like okay? I guess like where is the line here of like, well, the tier didn't move, and like the division or the rank differential isn't that large between what I'm disguising myself as and what I used to be. Like, is it that horrible?
And I think that at least in class situation, if yeah, that example where if you're silver, you're in tier four, but then you play on an account that's bronze when you're tier four, I don't think it's that bad just because I think it doesn't change the matchmaking system overall. I do think, however, that when it gets to those situations where you're a Masters player, but then you are going to play on a bronze account. So let's say, for example, the master account, you're tier 1, but then you drop down playing your Smurf account, which is supposedly tier 4. Then that's when I think it starts to become a huge problem because there is like a very large discrepancy in skill level that's not being accounted for because they're playing on not their actual account basically.
Yeah, and I think that that is kind of what we're trying to see here today is like, is Riot going to be able to make bigger barriers in order to prevent something like that, and also how that affects matchmaking overall. Something that I wish we had, but unfortunately, I don't think these are statistics that Riot would give us access to, or we would be able to even find ourselves. Is, well, just exactly that, is like how many Smurfs are there overall in Clash. And I think a more interesting topic for me personally would be, what tier do they normally reside, right? So let's say majority of Smurfs, this is just speculation here, let's say majority of Smurfs are tier 2 or tier 1 on their main accounts. Do they primarily go onto accounts that are tier 3 or tier 4? Does that mean that if you play in tier 4 with your team normally for Clash, you're more prone to playing against potential teams with Smurfs? I'm curious as to, um, yeah, what do these Smurfs typically try to do? Do they try to go just one division lower? Do they just try to go for like all the way at the bottom? Or are they using like lack of match history as like an advantage? So like, let's say it's a one trick Katarina mid laner who's like Diamond 2, and then they jump onto a bronze account that like only plays ADC. um, the enemy team might not even know this guy plays mid lane and is a one trick Katarina, right? Is that the advantage they're trying to aim for?
And I guess this is where it gets really interesting because I definitely do think that it's not necessarily cheating if you're using a different account to practice, like to hide that you're a category one trick, as long as that other account is in the same division. Because I think usually it happens in like regular sports as well, where when teams are practicing, they usually don't allow the reporters or like media cameramen to like enter the arena while they practice because like that is leaking critical information to supposedly the opponents and the public. But I think when it does like get to these situations where you're like I just mentioned the one trick Katarina and then oh, what's it called? Oh yeah, then you're playing a bronze account and you pretend make it pretend that like you don't play Katarina at all. There in a sense like you are hiding that you are like a really good Katarina player, but at the same time it's like you're cheating because you aren't playing at what like Riot what Riot thinks you are playing at, if that makes sense. And to basically summarize, if you're the Katarina one trick who is in master tier, considered tier one for the Clash matchmaking system, and then you play on a bronze account that shows that you don't play much Katarina at all, in that situation that would be cheating and not just, hiding information to the enemy team because this is basically fraud identity where you're posing as like someone you're not. In this case, being looking like you're a lot worse, but in actuality, you're just a one trick Katarina.
Yeah. Um, I think that at the end of the day, if I were to just look at it as an overall standpoint, like I think that smurfing in Clash definitely affects matchmaking because if you are a team of just bronze silvers and like legitimate bronze silvers obviously, and you're going into Clash and you're tier 4, and what it looks like on the enemy team is maybe, yeah, you are fighting like maybe a single gold, low gold, and like a couple bronze and silvers, like great, that's around your skill level, right? This should make it so that these games are close, right? Like on a theoretical basis, right? That's basically only based off of their ranks, and sometimes your previous class history will go into account for your tier levels. But yeah, that then on paper this should be fair. But once you add the smurfing concept and like the idea that people are capable of doing it, then that makes it so that games can become very one-sided, because especially in the low elos, if you are just someone who is much higher skill level, then you can quote unquote like 1v5 teams because you either are more mechanically gifted or talented, or you are just able to like have resources funneled to you, or you just know the game, you have more game knowledge than your opponent. I definitely think that smurfing has a large impact on the clash matchmaking, and it's definitely something that Riot would need to work on a bit more. Granted, from our case, like myself, Tuan, and the clash team we play with, I personally wouldn't say that we've ever experienced playing against potential Smurfs. At least on paper, we never felt like someone is extremely or largely overperforming, or their rank was just something ridiculous, like they were Iron 2 and they're pulling off like full Lee Sin insect combos and like that kind of stuff. But yeah, I definitely think that smurfing has a huge impact on the clash matchmaking.
Yeah. And there's actually something that I wonder, I want to hear your opinion about it, is like, can you like tell if someone's smurfing just based on their profile? if you say, for example, if the Smurf is on, let's say they're playing on a silver account when they're actually challenger. Are there any things that we can check from the scouting phase to make it like, get us thinking that they could potentially be a Smurf?
That's really interesting because some things like fundamentals are like if you just look based off of like numbers based things like KDA, then I think that that would be a good example as to someone being a Smurf, right? Like the classic, you see their match history. Maybe their match history isn't all wins, for example, but like let's say they're a laner, right? They're top laner, mid laner, or support, or sorry, ADC, and they have high CS numbers for you know like a silver player or bronze player, right? Typically, as you go up the ladder, you would expect people to get the fundamentals better, which would mean like the KDA is typically a bit better, their CS per minute's a bit better, and their damage per minute or their damage share would be higher, depending on what champions they're playing. But yeah, I think that the purely on a numbers basis thing, that's how I would kind of gauge it. But it's also possible that like some of the games they're just popping off, right? Like sometimes if you're just playing a low elo game and everyone's low elo and you're also low elo, like sometimes you just roll the dice and you get everything in your favor, right? But if in their majority of their match history it kind of looks like that, then that's when the alarm bells would ring in my head of like, oh, like this guy or girl is pretty good for what I would expect to see.
Hmm. Yeah, and I basically agree with everything I mentioned earlier. And and I know back then I've always tried to look at their champion mastery as a metric to see if they're Smurf or not. But I don't think I've ever seen an account that had less than like 100. Because I guess like back then, I always thought that if an account had less than 100 champion mastery, then that's when like my Smurf radar will like go buzzing all over the place. But yeah, I think looking at all the Clash that we played, basically I think everyone had 200 plus. So I'm not sure if that's really a valid way of checking if they're a Smurf or not. But yeah.
It's it's a really interesting concept because I believe I believe if I remember correctly, I want to say the earliest you can get, let's say like if you want to go the tiers of mastery because there's like level 4, 5, 6 and 7. Hopefully in the future there's more. But I believe the lowest possible level 7 mastery score you can have is like I want to say around 40,000 or 50,000. And so like that's like if you reached tier 6, or sorry, you reached tier 5 and then like you instantly got like two S minuses, you upgraded it, and then like right after that you got like three S's to be able to upgrade to level 7. um I want to say that that measurement of like mastery score is difficult because if you play a whole bunch of a champion and your scores gets really high, as always, it doesn't necessarily mean you are good at that champion. It just means you play them a lot. Like as always, like you can just keep playing and playing and playing and playing, and you just get more mastery score no matter what. But it isn't necessary. It isn't always exact like, oh, this means that this person is good at that champion, right? But obviously, if you have both statistics of like they are high ranked, and also they have a ton of games on that champion in ranked and their master score is high, that's the like all the signals of like, okay, this guy is really good at this champion, right? But for example, for myself, my highest master champion is Yasuo. I think he's sitting around like 200,000. I don't really play mid lane anymore. I'm now an ADC player, and I don't really plan on playing him much in ADC. It's possible, but does that mean that I'm smurfing and like I'm a crazy Yasuo player who can like if they don't ban it in Clash, then I'm just gonna smurf on these people? No, because that's someone I used to play, and I don't actually even play him anymore much, or even in ranked. So it's kind of hard to always be like, oh, this person has large mastery or small mastery, then that exactly means this or that.
Yeah, that's true. And I guess looking forward, do you think that there's like any ways that they could, you know, prevent people from smurfing? Because I always found it interesting that people smurf in the first place, just because I feel like they're like how much they value winning is just so high that they're willing to do anything to push the odds in their favor. And yeah, I wonder if like there's even much that I can do. Is this like something that's out of control and that will just like always exist in Clash no matter what? Or is there like a sure way to eliminate like 99% of them?
You would have to like force people to provide some form of personal information that they would not normally be allowed, or they would not, excuse me, normally be okay with sharing with other people. Because the current system, the barrier to entry is a barrier. Like it's at least something, right? SMS verification. But that's it, right? So, classic example, I have multiple friends who play League of Legends, and multiple of them have their own cell phones and have done the SMS verification. There's nothing stopping me from playing on their account by having their account information because they've already SMS verified on their phone, right? Riot can't detect that I'm playing on their account, and that account is apparently verified because my friend used their phone or whatever, right? Um, Going back to the original part where you said, is Smurfing always going to happen in Clash? I think so. I think that even in League and other games and all that stuff, like, I don't think there is always like a hard solution to something like Smurfing. That it kind of will always exist. It's just more of like a like this topic, right? How can they create more barriers or reduce the amount of Smurfs? And as said earlier, I don't think that this would be a practical solution, but we live in Canada. So, for example, if you had to provide your social security number to Riot, I know that's a
Oh,
ridiculous thing,
damn.
but I think that if you had to do that, I think for sure it would reduce the amount of Smurfs because that's something really serious, right? That's very important information. It's not something you're openly or willingly uh, wanting to give to anyone, whether it's literally strangers, a corporation, whatever. But that's just an extreme example. Like, I feel like Riot will definitely need to figure out something that is a big barrier. And for me personally, I think that a big barrier would have to be some form of personal information, right? The closest thing they could get to without being too egregious was obviously the SMS verification, but on the top of my head, I'm not sure if there is exactly a telltale solution towards reducing the amount of Smurfs. Did you have any thoughts on that?
Uh, yeah, I was actually wondering, like, what if there's a world where your account was locked to an IP address? Because then I think it would make it really interesting since it would force you to have to play on that like one certain like computer or like from that modem or router. And yeah, and basically if you make a Smurf account, it has to be one that you like physically made yourself because if you bought the account, for example, it probably wouldn't let you since like it'll probably recognize that the IP address doesn't match. So like you have to work extra hard to make that Smurf account and not just, pay how much money that, they usually charge for these boosted accounts per se. Well, okay, so boosted is just find out the right word because that implies that it's a high rank account, but like just like buying accounts for clash purposes. And when you mention providing the whole social security number, sorry, I think that's actually another puzzle option too, because I know that in other regions like Korea, for example, you actually do need to provide your, I don't know what what they call it, but like basically their version of your social security number in order to like make accounts in general. Because I know that you have to use it when even signing up. So it's not even like just for Clash purposes for verifying account. Like you actually need to provide it to them if you want to make a league account at all. So I think it can definitely work, but I guess then the only other thing is if they do provide that, will like how well protected will it be? Is there any possibility of like there being a security breach and then all that information being possibly leaked? Is that something that, you know, league players would be willing to risk to in order to participate in Clash?
Yeah, I think that it's definitely something that's like, oh man, like, do you do you want to provide that stuff as a human being in order just to play in this tournament thing? I think there's probably some people who would want to, but I think that it would create a much larger barrier for sure. Um, but yeah, this is such an interesting topic because just thinking about on paper, right? Like, how do you make it so? It's such a funny idea. How do you make things more uncomfortable or more annoying for people to have to do in order just so that they just play on their actual accounts? That's basically what the barrier or like that kind of stuff is what we're talking about here. So it's just funny to think about like if you're using a real life example, right? Like someone's trying to climb a wall and there's a rope, right? And so okay, so they just need to have enough strength in order to climb up the wall. And what we're trying to think of is like what are other ways to make it more difficult for them to climb up this wall? Okay, we could get a monkey who throws barrels at this person while they're trying to climb up the wall. It's like, okay, so
Oh my
that'll
god.
reduce a good amount of people. What else can we have? We can have spikes on the wall. So like they can't always to go to one side of the wall. Like maybe they have to go a specific path, right? Like and then now the rope is moving, so it's gonna slowly start lowering. So they have to climb faster than the rope.
Oh my
Um,
god.
so that's like three barriers now in order to reduce the amount of people that want to do it, because they either have to do that if they want to Smurf, or they can just take an escalator or a set of stairs up to their regular account, right? And there's always going to be someone who's going to be able to do it, right? There's always going to be someone who's like going to be able to climb up the rope fast enough, dodge all the barrels, avoid all the spikes, and Smurf, right? That'll always happen for sure. But um, creating a way where less and less people would want to is more or less the thing. And I think that going back to your earlier idea of the IP address one, I think that that is a good idea. I think that the only concern for me is if well, you move, right? And then like that's obviously like its own like thing like oh like people aren't normally just moving all the time, but that is something that I definitely think that League of Legends players might be like, "Oh, but like, you know, like I want to play Clash, but like I'm not in my house right now, so I can't play Clash because the IP address is different." And like, will Riot implement a way to allow you to switch IP addresses? But like, oh, but then if everyone can switch IP addresses, the barrier to entries lowered once again. And yeah, I feel like there's always going to be holes in ideas to reduce the amount of Smurfs for Clash, but I think just having them out there is better than not because I think that it is an issue. As I said before, I don't think it's an issue that we've succumbed to, but yeah, I think that more barriers is definitely something that should exist. And going to that detection topic that you talked about, like how could you detect? I am curious if like maybe that is the solution. What if Riot is capable of detecting that someone is smurfing?
Hmm. Yeah, and just think that like, well, what if there could be, you know, we're always thinking about how do we prevent people smurfing, but I think it's also we should ask what can we do to make it playing on your main counts more worth it? Because I always feel like another possible reason why people Smurf is because like the rewards you get from it just doesn't, you know, it's not worth it basically. It's like if I play myself can we win, well it's like, oh I'm not gonna miss out on anything that can get my main account because I'm just getting a bunch of skin shards and or like emotes and icons. And like it doesn't like make it very enticing to the players to use the real accounts because the rewards that they're getting it's just, it's basically nothing when you really like look deep down into it because all the rewards you're getting, you get to redeem, and then all the other stuff that you actually get that are perma. I mean, you can't really even show it off in game, like maybe the emotes, but then again, like there's only so much that you can do with emotes, and sometimes the opponents won't even see it because they may have emotes disabled. So it's like I guess like what I'm trying to get at here is that there's no, like rewards that you can like show off in a sense and like sort of be like, oh hey, look at me, I won Clash, and like I get all these cool stuff. And yeah, just basically wondering like if there's anything that I could do to also make it like, more rewarding to be playing on your actual accounts.
Yeah, I think that's such a great um, concept, like to go the other way, right? Like we did that video last month about the or sorry, the Clash rewards um, last month. If you haven't seen it, please check it out. um,
Like,
but yeah, I think that is a good way of going the other way. Is like if the rewards are just so good that you would realistically want it on your main account, and so that is a way of like instead of the Diamond 2 Katarina main wanting to play on the Smurf account so their team has a better chance of winning and stuff like that, like they're like, oh man, like that idea in the video we said is like, what if there was a Clash um skin on like 5 specific champions, right? What if it was for some reason, I don't think it would be, but what if it was a Katarina skin, right? And the guy's like, oh my god, like I'm a Katarina one trick. If we win Clash and I roll the lottery and I get the Clash Katarina skin, that would be amazing, right? So I think that that is a really good way of going the opposite direction. Of instead of creating more barriers, you can reduce the amount of Smurfs by making the rewards so good that you really just want it on like your main, right? Realistically, or at least the account that you play on more, right? And let's say that the Smurf still plays on their Smurf, right? And they get the rewards on that account. They might just also just play on that account more because they do have the rewards on that account, which inadvertently would turn that account into their main. So that does at the end of the day still solve the problem because eventually, they'll be playing the account more often. If they're gonna rank on it, they might rank on it more because they have the skins or whatever. They have the cool stuff on it, and yeah, I think that idea of increasing the rewards or making the rewards even more enticing would be a good way to reduce the amount of Smurfs in a positive way, right? Because a lot of the times, if we were to use, like Riot balancing team, is like instead of always nerfing stuff, what if you just buff other stuff, right? And so your example of instead of creating more barriers but making the rewards more enticing, I think that that is a really good direction to go in order to reduce the amount of Smurfs. Yeah, definitely. But yeah, so that'll be the end of our podcast episode for today. Yeah, we were talking about Smurfs and Clash and, creating barriers of entry, what is Smurfing in general, and obviously how it affects Clash matchmaking. Yeah, tune in next time for our next episode. I've been your host, Emerson,
and I've been the co-host Twan.
and thanks for watching.